Good afternoon. Welcome to the Health Innovation Meeting. The topic of this year's meetings is the new challenges of health innovation. Promoting innovation is one of the main drivers of HCP activities, as we firmly believe that innovation is the main force to boost value in health. We all know that innovation implies long-term vision, market orientation, collaboration across institutions and sectors, and also investment. Throughout the years, Health Cluster Portugal has worked in promoting health as a major driver for social and economic development. Pushed by the recent developments across the world, we have prepared an action plan that intends to contribute to the Portuguese recovery and resilience plan. Today, we are happy to share this plan and discuss some of the main ideas that have stemmed from it. This work was prepared having in mind the unique importance of the health sector, emphasized by the pandemic, as well as its most relevant trends and opportunities, and also the strategic positioning of the health industries in our country and across the world. The outcome of this plan are 15 specific initiatives which range from business investments in several domains of the health value chain to a set of public policy actions. The stakes are high, and so is our ambition. These initiatives are expected to place the Portuguese health sector as a competitive player for investors, big global companies, and startups from all over the world. At HCP, we believe the health sector can be one of the main drivers for Portugal growth if we work together and hard to make it happen. Today, we will discuss 3 topics of the Health Development Plan, namely knowledge valorization, smart health, and clinical trials. Our guest speakers will present case studies from the well-known organizations they represent across the world in order to promote the discussion and define next steps for Portugal. Thank you for accepting the challenge. From our side, we expect this to be only the beginning of a much broader discussion involving all the stakeholders as a way of rethinking the new and the not so new challenges in health. Once again, welcome and have a good day. We will have now a video message from the Minister of Economy, Mr. Pedro Cisa Vieira.
Greetings to the participants in this seminar on innovation in healthcare, but also greetings in particular to the Health Cluster Portugal, which is a very significant partner of the Portuguese government and the Ministry of Economy in developing and creating a more sustainable sector in our country. This last year, and the impact of the pandemic of the COVID-19 disease has shown even more clearly the importance of resilient health systems for the benefit of society. We have seen how a robust health system allows countries and nations to better cope with crisis, whether sanitary crisis or disease, new pandemics emerging, or even just the ability of coping with natural catastrophes. But we have gone further. We have seen how the advancements in science and technology has allowed the world to very quickly develop and deploy new drugs and vaccines which are effective in the treatment of new and rare diseases. But more than that, we have also seen become more aware of the importance of health systems to make sure that we increase the capability of a nation to sustain healthy lives, longer lives for their citizens, and how this brings about economic and human value. This is something we must invest. And this is why also we will see in the coming years considerable investment in innovation and growth of the healthcare systems around the world. It has become very clearly that countries need to develop resilient health systems, making sure that we have procurement systems in place which are robust and redundant to deal with access to critical materials, critical components, or even medical devices. We have also seen how important it is to muster and make use of new technologies such as new biotech or advanced computing and artificial intelligence to just make sure that we evolve to a system which is more centered into the patient and less so in the disease. This will create the ability of delivering more effective treatment and a more balanced health system in a much more efficient way. This is the road of the future and will be facilitated by innovation. The government and the healthcare cluster in Portugal have signed a pact for competitiveness and internationalization of the industry. I am thankful to the Health Cluster Portugal for providing and developing the study that we will know better about in this session. It is a comprehensive analysis of opportunities for growth and for development of health systems and taking advantage of all these new realities and the opportunities to make sure that the value we bring about to the economy and the society in Portugal is increased significantly. We coincide in the analysis of the strengths of our country in healthcare and in the possibilities for development. The quality of our medical and scientific staff and also the natural quality of our people. The quality of our science and research, but also the quality of our institutions, whether healthcare institutions, universities or research centers. These are all assets we must make sure that we make to use for a better contribute to a growth in the system and the economy. We know that the next few years will also provide an opportunity to take advantage of these assets, to take hold and stock of these opportunities and invest in the future growth of our systems and to create better jobs, increase the economic value of healthcare in Portugal and also to bring about more export. We will have significant resources to invest in these opportunities. The National Recovery and Resilience Plan, the next multi-financial year framework from the European Union will be able to provide resources to invest in innovation, to make sure that we allocate appropriate resources to make this promise a reality. We need a roadmap for that. And the study which the Health Cluster has developed is a very sound basis for that roadmap. I wish to continue to work closely with the sector and bring about not only these changes in targeting investments and innovation, but also in bringing about a framework which is more favorable to innovation and to the economic development of our system. Let's make this happen. And this is what I am looking forward in the next few years. Thank you.
Good afternoon. We will now watch a short video presentation of the Health Development Plan. So I ask those of you who do not speak Portuguese for your understanding for this 2-minute video because it has been produced in Portuguese.
A crise pandémica veio evidenciar a centralidade da saúde e o papel cada vez mais determinante da sua cadeia de valor no nosso desenvolvimento social e económico. Em termos nacionais, foi identificada a necessidade de um plano de ação que reconheça em definitivo a importância estratégica deste ecossistema e fomente o aumento da sua atratividade e competitividade no contexto europeu e mundial. Dos exercícios de análise e diagnóstico realizados e da audição dos principais atores envolvidos, foram encontradas 6 áreas de aposta. Medicamentos inovadores, Smart Health, medicamentos essenciais, dispositivos médicos, ensaios clínicos, valorização do conhecimento, as quais observam um elevado nível de alinhamento com o recentemente aprovado Plano de Recuperação e Resiliência. A ambição é grande, tendo como referencial o ano de 2030, pretende-se atingir 1.000 milhões de euros de investimento anual em investigação e desenvolvimento, estimular a geração de um valor acrescentado bruto em torno dos 2,6 mil milhões anuais, atingir um nível de emprego industrial de 35 mil trabalhadores, maioritariamente emprego qualificado e muito qualificado, atingir um volume anual de exportações de 5 mil milhões. Com o Plano de Desenvolvimento da Saúde, pretende-se reforçar o Pacto Saúde Mais Valor, já celebrado entre o Health Cluster Portugal e o Ministério da Economia, e sob este lançar um conjunto integrado de 15 iniciativas dirigidas às 6 áreas de aposta, as quais deverão ser concretizadas, na sua maior parte, até meados da presente década, envolvendo um volume global de investimento de 2,5 a 3,5 mil milhões de euros. Investimento empresarial em fármacos inovadores. Investimento empresarial em inovação incremental, Pharma e MedTech. Projeto mobilizador para dispositivos médicos via indústrias adjacentes. Projeto mobilizador para têxteis de elevado desempenho para a saúde. Portugal Senior Living. Health Portugal Data Lake. Plataforma Portugal Smart Health. Inovação produtiva em Smart Health. Health Business Portugal. Clinical Trials Powerhouse. Organismo notificado em Smart Health. Agenda mobilizadora para a reindustrialização da saúde. Reguladores 5.0. Veículo financeiro de ensaios e startups Pharma e MedTech. Promoção Health Portugal para incrementos das exportações e IDE. Este plano de desenvolvimento da saúde pretende constituir ainda a estrutura e a essência das agendas da saúde, cuja candidatura às agendas para a recuperação e reindustrialização do Plano de Recuperação e Resiliência, o Health Cluster Portugal, pretende estimular. Health Cluster Portugal. Pensamos juntos o futuro das indústrias de saúde.
The first session of this afternoon will be presented by Dr. Luís Correia on value creation in biotech startups, followed by the commentary of 2 prominent researchers and insightful players of the Portuguese ecosystem, Professor Paulo Alves, the CEO of IBET Research Institute in Lisbon, and Professor Cláudio Sonkel, the director of I3S Research Institute in Porto. So on behalf of the Health Cluster Portugal, I would like to thank you for kindly and promptly accepting this invitation. Dr. Luís Correia is currently the Business Development Director at Roche, Switzerland, and he's also the representative of Roche Pharma partnering at Base Launch, a biotech startup incubator based in Basel. And today he will share his views and experience on how to create value in biotech. So Dr. Luís Correia, thank you so much. I invite you now to share your screen with the audience.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can. It's not in presentation mode. It's actually in presentation mode, but not the full screen mode.
You need to switch the screens, Luis.
Yes, I'm trying.
Swap the swap.
Okay. Can you see it now?
That's it. Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Health Cluster Portugal for the invitation to present today. I'm going to share a few thoughts on how Portugal can create value in biotechnology, and then I'm going to give you an example of how it's being done in Basel, in Switzerland, and at the end I'm going to give you some ideas on how what role healthcare cluster can play in supporting the value creation in biotech in Portugal. So on my next slide, I'm observing with a lot of pleasure that companies in the IT space in Portugal have created valuations of $1 billion per company, which we currently call the unicorns. And the challenge I have for the audience today and for Health Cluster Portugal is, can we do the same in the biotech sector? Can we generate companies with this sort of valuations? What does it take to get to those valuations in biotech? And how can Healthcare Cluster Portugal contribute to boost this sector? And so to illustrate what it takes, I've made a small graph of the ecosystem and the things that the key players that need to exist and need to work together in order to generate the value of biotech a long time. And if we move from left to right, many times this starts in academia. So academia generates ideas. It oftentimes finds the new targets, new medical targets. It develops new chemistry or biochemistry, and ultimately it generates intellectual property. Good academic institutions have their own patents, and once a biotech company very often it's people who are in academia who want to start these companies, they set up the company and they do a licensing deal with academia. So the patents do belong to academia, and the biotech companies acquires those patents and commits itself to paying a royalty over time throughout the lifetime of the biotech company. Then if you move to the right-hand side, the next thing that you need is money as a biotech company. And that money, while in academia, most of the time it does come from state funds, in the case of biotech, most of the time the money comes from private investment funds. And those funds are very critical, not only because they provide money, but also because they have the right expertise, they have the right patience and understanding how long it takes to develop a biotech drug. And most of the time in early stages of these companies, they have substantial equity stakes and they are members of the board of these companies. So they play a very important role in guiding the strategy of the company. Then moving down to the next player, which is also extremely important. So all of them are extremely important, are hospitals. And when I say hospitals here, I should have said hospitals with a very focused interest on research as well. So in addition to their day-to-day business, they have a commitment to conducting early stage trials, what we call translational medicine, the first trials in humans, and then to be involved in later stage investigational studies. Oftentimes, hospitals can also be participants in the equity of biotechs, and I was involved in the acquisition of Spark Therapeutics in Philadelphia 2 years ago, where Roche acquired the company for $4.3 billion. And one of the major stakeholders in Spark Therapeutics was the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. So right at the start of the company, the Children's Hospital did invest in this gene therapy company. And by the time that Roche acquired the Spark Therapeutics, it had to write a check of $600 million to the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, as this was the part corresponding to their stake. Finally, last but not least, the key vendors are contract research organizations and contract manufacturing organizations. More and more, I come across biotech companies which are not a lot more than project management companies. So they don't actually have laboratories themselves, or they don't have a factory that produces for them. Instead, they work very closely with CROs and CMOs. And I believe my impression from conversations I've had recently is that Portugal does have a bit of all of these, but it can do a lot more. Each one of those four supportive pillars of the biotech ecosystem can work closer together, and there is scope, and within the program that was mentioned earlier by Salvador and by the minister, I think this is sounds very promising. So going now into a little bit more detail of what it takes. At Roche, the way we see these programs, we can more or less distinguish between three types of stages of development of a biotech company. And the left-hand side with the preclinical development is the one that very often is the hardest to get off the ground and to get it to patients, because it requires not only what is typically done in academia, which is target identification and oftentimes molecules identification, so leads and optimization, but then everything else which beefs up the package that allows the regulators to say, okay, this is a candidate that we can give to humans, like toxicology and the ability of producing this in large enough amounts, and ultimately also the business case. So, to justify that there is a worthy investment, it all leads up into the important milestone of investigational new drug. And then further to that, we have the early stage clinical trials. Most of the audience will be familiar with it. More and more, there is not such a big distinction between phase 1 and phase 2. Often we go directly to volunteer patients. This is particularly the case in oncology and rare diseases. But then once you have that proof of concept, in the majority of the cases, we need to conduct large-scale studies in late-stage development, and then we need to already from an early stage have very close interactions with the regulators to understand if we are on the right path. So for instance, after phase 2, there is a very important meeting called end of phase 2 meeting with the regulators, with Food and Drug Administration, or EMA. And this is a very important, from an investor point of view, a very important value creation event as well. So as we move along, I want to give you some feeling for the numbers that are involved in these different steps of a biotech life cycle. These are obviously illustrative and vary a lot between different indications and different diseases and molecules, but this gives you a sort of idea. And so the temptation is for small biotechs, to look for a partnership with big pharma at a very early stage. And in general, we discourage that at Roche, or we encourage biotechs to come to a point where they have generated a credible, large enough amount of data that makes their project more plausible. And as you can see, as you move from left to right, you also see that there is a lot more value created. The more data you are able to generate, the longer you are able to remain independent, the more value you will create. And this is a big message for a country like Portugal, where potentially there will be a temptation to make a quick money after you have generated some data and you want to exit very quickly. There are opportunities, and we should not disregard the opportunity that is given to Portugal right now with these funds. I think I saw in the video earlier that there are between 150 and 200 million euros dedicated to supporting startups. So that's already a promising amount of money that can take companies very far if the money is well spent. With this, I think I'm going to give you an example of what we are doing here in Basel with Roche together with BaseLaunch as a case study. So BaseLaunch is based in Basel. Basel is in the north part of Switzerland. You can see here on the picture on the right-hand side, this blue line means it's the River Rhine. On the right-hand side of that blue line is Germany. On the left-hand side is France, and to the bottom half of that circle is Switzerland. So it is within 3 countries, and you can see the flags actually on this map. The anchor companies here in Basel are Roche and Novartis. Of course, they are 2 of the largest in the world, but there are dozens and dozens of other companies here. The universities here work very closely with industry, and not only from Basel, but also from the rest of Switzerland, and even Strasbourg and Freiburg, the universities that are around Basel here. On the next slide, you can see that right now BaseLaunch is a startup incubator that, even though it is based in Basel, it is open to companies that apply from everywhere. We've had also applications from Portugal and Spain, and some of them have made it relatively far in the selection process. The condition, though, is that the companies end up having at least some presence in Basel. And the other important point here is that it is focused on therapeutics only. So there is no medical devices or diagnostics. It's exclusively dedicated to therapeutics. These are the current partners. You can see it is a mix of industrial pharma companies and venture funds. What is also important, if you see at the bottom here, is that there is an infrastructure that is supported by the local government. This allows the overheads to be paid by the government, so that the money that the partners contribute to BaseLaunch is exclusively dedicated for the companies to continue their work, generate more data, and to generate more value, and to eventually then go to financing rounds with venture funds, the classical Series A, Series B, etc., until they go public in an IPO. This is the selection process. So there are around 150 applications a year. BaseLaunch team has a dedicated group of 3 or 4 scientists and business people who do the first triaging to 30 companies. Then they help these companies prepare their pitch to the selection panel, and eventually then around 12 per year get to present to us, to the selection panel, and around 4 are selected for financing. It's important to note that this financing is really not a lot in terms of dollar terms. It's $250,000 a year for 2 years. But for these companies, it's first of all very prestigious to receive this, and it allows them enough funding to generate the data that is necessary to complement what they generated typically in academia. And it gives them a certain seal of approval when they then go for further financing rounds. Well, of course, it's also interesting to them that big pharma and the venture funds are interested right from the start, get exposure to these companies and get to know these companies from a very early stage. And at the same time, for the venture funds, and pharma is the other way around. They are interested in learning about these companies as early as possible. So here we go. I already mentioned $500,000 in support, access to partners, access to labs and infrastructure. BioLaunch is in the process of getting a very modern laboratory building that you can see here, which is made available for startup companies. All of this, I believe, already exists in Portugal as well. So it seems to me, there is no lack of space. What is needed is a stronger interaction between the different healthcare players, like the venture funds and the hospitals and the CROs and CMOs, and then, of course, having the right environment to foster the creation and follow through of these biotech companies. So this is the scorecard of BioLaunch so far. The companies that have been nurtured by BioLaunch have raised around $200 million over the past few years. And these are some of the investors that have then followed through with the biotech startups from BioLaunch. So this is my final slide. I don't know how much time I've spent. What can Healthcare Cluster Portugal do to promote the biotech industry in Portugal? First off, it's important to educate the players about the aspects that I've mentioned, the length it takes, the risks that are involved, the complexity. So I want to argue that it is much harder to generate a biotech company with a 1 billion valuation than a technology. Maybe there are no IT people here in this forum who probably would disagree with me, but I'm arguing, and I hope I showed you in this presentation, that it is pretty complex to get a drug to market, and it's a very lengthy and risky process. What Healthcare Cluster Portugal can also do is promote connectivity, promote industry events like today's, but then hopefully when COVID is over, we can do this all in person and the people can meet face to face. This is extremely important to generate collaborations. And this is a very essential part of the work we do at Roche Pharma Partnering. To lobby politics, it's important to set the right environment. How many stories do we have from companies in Portugal that struggle because of all the taxes and the legal issues and finance issues? So there's a lot of work that can be done here by an institution like Healthcare Cluster Portugal. And finally, it is important to provide space and to provide a voice to the biotech incubators and can work as an agglomerator of all the effort that is being done, that these companies don't feel like they are fighting for these things on their own, but that there is a supportive environment around them and that they can turn to for issues like influencing, lobbying, and making sure that they get the right context, the right environment to flourish. With this, I am finished. Again, thank you very much for your attention, and I believe, Patricia, now that you want to open up for discussion, for a panel.
Yes, sure I do. So thank you very much, Dr. Luís Correia, for sharing this very interesting examples and challenging thoughts. I would now ask the two other panelists of this session for their commentaries on the subject, namely their insights on the major challenges, but also the opportunities for Portugal on knowledge valorization in health. So starting by Professor Paula Alves, if she could please join the discussion. Yes, we can see you already.
Yes, I'm okay. So first of all, I want to thank the invitation to be here today commenting and discussing Luís' presentation. So Luís, very many thanks thanks for your introduction. Of course, you are taking the position of someone coming from a big pharma, looking for young startups and for partnering. And we do agree that your concept of these clusters is really phenomenal. In fact, at IBET, we've been collaborating with some of these clusters you mentioned, namely in Stockholm, in Karolinska and Charité, Berlin. So we do, and in Munich, for instance. So some of these clusters, we know them well and how they act and how they are organized. And so in numbers, let's say, and looking at your presentation, for us here, everything makes sense. But I think the most difficult number, it's not even the money that you mentioned, that we are in a completely different dimension here in Portugal, but also the time it takes and how resilient you have to be if you want to advance here this field in biotech, because it's a different area, as you mentioned, it's not IT. So let me share with you some examples, and of course I will share our example that we have here at IBET, and this is just our view that is much smaller. So it's the view of some institution that has a smaller side, but that has been in a way trying to organize competencies in this area. So after almost 30 years coming from nowhere, and of course supported by our associates, and some of which are from the Portuguese pharma companies that mainly were more handling and doing and investing in small drugs, what we have been developing here at IBET is the capacity to advance cell biologics, namely advanced therapeutical medicinal products that you referred also. And we've been doing this since the early 90s. So mainly we started with the gene therapy, and then, as you know, it was a big thing, the gene therapy at that time. And then we had to face the lack of investment in that area because of the problems we had in some of the products for the gene therapy. So we did the retrovirus, then lenti, more recently also adenovirus that we are also now using for vaccines, and then enter the stem cell field. And all of this requires a lot of resilience and investment, and as you mentioned, a lot of money. And we are trying to do and to take the best out of it. And today I can share that we export more than 90% of our research. So we really went and we target top notch. We wanted to do biologics, and what we've been doing in these 30 years was trying to create the infrastructure that can support these activities. And that is not only R&D, as you mentioned, it's the R&D. We also invested in an infrastructure of late stage R&D and bioproduction, a GMP certification for analytics in biologics. And now, because we have all this infrastructure here, we can attract, for instance, 4 satellite labs from the big pharma. And we are able now to create jobs and to retain scientists in Portugal. You mentioned this, the minister also mentioned that. It's really important that we can also have this capacity of creating high value jobs, like jobs for scientists, that we invest a lot in training and in education. So after all this investment in 30 years and with the infrastructure we have here at IBET, I can share also that we can only make 15 million a year at IBET. And this is just the scale that we are talking about when you compare with your numbers and the numbers you presented. If we had what we do at our startup that we created 15 years ago, that is Genibet, and we created this much later because we could not find the investment to do it. And finally, when we could do it, we created this startup company. And now it's mainly doing biologics for phase 1-2 clinical trials. And most of these biologics goes to the United States because because that's where the money is and the investment is for going faster in this type of new products in biotech and these biopharmaceuticals and these novel ways of doing medicines. So if you sum it together with IBET and GeniBet, all together after all these years, our revenue is still less than 25 million a year. So really, really tiny if you think about biotech. And I think if you consider that in the surrounding of IBET, in the Lisbon area, if we include ITQB, IMM, IGC, Tagus Park, some small biotechs you have around, 2 medical schools, the oncology hospital, I think that we are probably the closest thing you have in the country to what you consider a cluster in biotech. Of course, there are other spots, but I don't think they are really in biopharma, but they are more dedicated to small molecules, other type of biotech-related things for food, enzymes, and so on. So this is really a tough area to be and to start and to create value. And some of the unicorns you mentioned are in other areas like IT software, artificial intelligence, and so on. And usually what we say is that these things come out from people that come with the concept. And then usually we say that if they don't have a headache, they can work 24 hours a day, and they only need brains and computers and in silico. And this is not biotech, as you mentioned. So when we talk about biotech, it requires costly investment, huge infrastructure, and long discovery cycles. It is a completely different business, as you mentioned. So of course, I think we will have opportunities, and there will be opportunities for some others. I hope that we can maintain this model of IBET. And of course, for biotech that is more based in silico, and of course, I can think also about the product coming from a research lab and so on, but these are really need investment and more cycles of investment, as you mentioned. And this is not the model we use, like coming from a small lab and going into a product. It was, I think it's not the model that you've been describing in the clusters you are describing, but I think it's also a possibility we have here in Portugal. We have to really take advantage of all this money that we are discussing now. And but I think that we are progressing, and we have a long way to go. And at least here at the Oeiras, I think we have a modicum of activities that we can call a cluster of biotech. And of course, if we think about the new ways of doing medicine, like those you referred also, we can think also about support development of medicines in hospitals. And here the health clusters can also be a big value with the networking and also the lobbying, as you know, because if you have connections, especially in not only in Europe, but also in the United States, we can progress faster. So summing up, I think we still have a long way to go and should really keep our resilience, and hopefully with more long-term investment, more cycles of investment, and not giving up. I think it's the key word. I think we can do it, but it will take time. But I think our capacity of being resilient and trying. One thing that I think it's really critical here in Portugal is that we don't try to, in a way, spread and try to focus and invest in clusters that already create value in some areas and others that can create in other areas. And because it's a lot, if something is going well, I think we should not give up and should try to invest and not spread. I think this is something that has been happening in the past, and this takes time. So we need more constant investment, and also the politicians to believe that this is also part of the future and that creates a big value to our country. Thank you. I hope I didn't over time.
Thank you, Professor Pavlovich. I would now ask Professor Sunkel's commentary, please.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for the opportunity to comment on this presentation, but also congratulations to the Health Cluster Portugal on bringing this topic to the discussion. It's a really a fundamental issue. How do we transfer knowledge to impact in society and companies and economic development? and make the future of Portugal a knowledge society and not and much more knowledge intensive in the future. So this is for me, it's a very complex issue. I'm not going to talk about specifically about what happens in my institution. I think Paula described what's going on in her institution. I was thinking more, and my comments are going to be more in a general sense. So I think this idea or this concept of how do we transfer knowledge to the economy has, I use the word, haunted the Portuguese scientific and technology system for a long time. But I think that I'm very much more also very positive, as Paula and to some extent Luis also expressed. We have an incredible development of the Portuguese scientific system over the last 25 years. So we now have over 300 research units. We have a lot of associate labs, many collaborative laboratories, technology centers. And over the last, I would say, 10 years or so, there's been a big push towards the transfer of knowledge to the economy and society. One important issue we need to consider is that over the last of this development which took place over the last 25 years or so, we have created and we have now the best qualified human resources that Portugal ever had. I was looking at the figures yesterday, and for example, in 2020, nearly 3,000 PhDs were awarded. So this is really a large pool of highly qualified human resources. But I was also very surprised because if you look at the figures in 2019, only 3% of these human resources are actually employed by companies. So we still have not only question of transferring knowledge to society, to the economy, but also we have an issue about altering to some extent the way that companies look at the academy and highly qualified human resources and absorb these human resources for development and innovation in many different areas. So we really clearly need to capitalize on all of this potential. Portugal, in Portuguese scientific system, the health sciences represent about 10% of the researchers. And in terms of productivity, I would say publications, the health sector represents about 27% of these. So there is a large scope here for implementation. I cannot emphasize something that Paula and Luis also said, which is that this is not IT. This is not, this area it's a complex area that requires the cycle between let's say between an idea and its implementation is very long. And as the development plan for health in Portugal by the Health Cluster Portugal, which I had a chance to look during this week, there are many issues that are very important to consider here. And one of them is that regulatory issues in this area are particularly restrictive in Portugal. So this is an area that really needs to be analyzed, discussed, and made to some extent less stringent, so that we can go from the proof of concept to clinical implementations in a much faster way. But also there is the nature of the biological research. Biological research takes a long time. It's a long and tortuous road, and ideas take a long time to reach the bedside. So in any way, I am very not hopeful, but I say I'm very positive about what is actually happening in Portugal. And I think that the case of VIBET, it's a very important case because it really exemplifies what most of the research institutions in Portugal do, which is these are individual initiatives, these are individual networking, and as the word that Paula also used, which is resilience of researchers. So researchers in Portugal, if they want to transfer their ideas to the economy, they have to be really resilient and they have to work very hard at it. So the picture now is not as bad. we have many companies that have been set up, and these are small companies. They have been extremely active in terms of raising funding, although not as much as, of course, the case that we saw in Basel. But they've winning awards. They have, to some extent, raised venture capital for the proof of concept, but the picture is still quite needs to be developed. Now, on the other hand, the research institutions, I think, are beginning to do quite a lot. They have set up a large number of units that are involved in technology transfer, and they are showing very interesting and very promising results. I think there is also an issue that we need to consider, which is the mindset of both researchers and students that are now in the areas of the life sciences and the health sciences. It's very interesting to see now that people are now much more open to the possibility of getting involved in technology transfer and valorization of research. And both master students and PhD students are really considering exploring the possibility of moving from academy to industry as a clear possibility. So there is no longer this idea that academy is the only thing that they can do. There is also this mindset that is changing, which is, I think, very important. So my feeling is that the landscape is clearly changing. It is much more favorable, but we need to find ways, more, let's say, structured ways in which valorization can be implemented in this area. I pinpointed here 5 things that I think are really, really important. The first one is this amazing story of Base Launch, which is not just Base Launch. Is that this type of incubator has been implemented in many places. And here, what do we find? We find a dedicated space, a dedicated laboratory space with support that receives the companies and promotes their development. And in all sorts of ways. This is not just the support of the lab, but this is support of the, searching for funding, searching for partners, searching for showcasing their ideas and helping them to promote. So this is, although there are a few in Portugal, there are very few, and these very few are not enough. I was just thinking, you have 7 or 8 major universities in Portugal, and clearly each one of these major universities should have a dedicated space where an organization like Base Launch should be there, that screens the ideas, screens the companies, and then once they decided to accept the companies and to incubate them, to really incubate them, to be so an incubator for startups in this area should be an essential component of the ecosystem. The second part, I think, is very important, is very crucial, is that these companies need to have access to very expensive infrastructure. Biological research requires this very specialized infrastructure, and the way to do it is not to perhaps duplicate what we have, but to take advantage of the national infrastructure roadmap that is now beginning to be developed in Portugal and is quite advanced. And we need to promote synergies between industry and this national infrastructure roadmap so that they can take advantage of it. The third aspect is I still think that we need to define a much better structured funding program. That this could be regional, they could be national, but this need to promote proof of concept of launching startups, especially to support human resources that become fully dedicated to develop the projects. We cannot just have academic staff working part-time in the companies, because that's not going to take them very far. So there need to be a way of funding these human resources on a full-time dedicated to the companies and development of companies. The fourth aspect is something that was not touched by Luis, but I think that it's very crucial, is that we need communication channels that not only we always think about technology transfer or knowledge transfer coming from the academy to the companies. That's an important part and a very significant part. But there's also another way of communication that needs to be developed, which is that companies need to approach the academic system and needs to bring the academic systems their problems and their projects and what they're looking for. So we need to really change to some extent, move researchers from their comfort zone, which is their usual projects, the usual funding, the national funding of their projects, to explore ideas together with companies on projects that they are competent in, but they may not have thought about it. So we need to improve channels of communications between industry and companies. Companies need to be more open to discussing with the academic sector what are the actual needs. And I think that finally, something that was not touched here, but it's dear to my heart, it's the need to promote in a larger scale and in a much broader scale funding for the scientific and technological system in Portugal. We're still running Portugal scientific system, which has increased incredibly in the last 25 years, with funding which is really clearly not sufficient. We are expending about 1.4 of our GDP in research and development. 50% of this is private investment, which means that the total amount of funding that is used for the development of the scientific system and for its maintenance, it's really becoming limiting and not sufficient for what we really need to do. So we need to increase funding, and we need to increase funding because it is to some extent, to a large extent, basic science that provides some of the great ideas that will be implemented in the future. And we really don't know where they will come. And just to give you 2 or 3 examples, I mean, we now every day hear about Pfizer and Moderna, and those developments were basic biology, molecular biology tools that were developed on the basis of a completely different research programs in terms of their vaccines. But we also have cases like CRISPR-Cas9, which was also developed and studied as a very small area in research in microbiology, and now has a huge impact in society. So I think that we need to define a few structure roadmaps that can be implemented and help development of this transfer of knowledge from academia to industry and the collaboration between industry and academia. We have made a lot of progress. Our history is relatively short, but we have a great potential. And I think that with the relatively small changes and changes in attitude we can overcome some of these major hurdles that are currently hampering the development of the Portuguese health sector and the transfer of knowledge from academy to industry. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Sunkel. So we have now a couple of minutes more to go for the questions from the audience. And then I would ask for final feedback from Dr. Luis Correia. But first, there's this topic that Professor Paula Alves also mentioned about the need to focus on specific areas, both in terms of strategy, in terms of investment. And picking on this, there's a question from the audience that is related with incubation of companies that Professor Sunkel was also mentioning. And the question is if you think it's key to have venture capital that is focused on specific areas, for instance, and in this case, in biotech. So we can bring not only money, but also knowledge in terms of the market, in terms of business development for these ideas or projects that are being developed. I don't know which one of you would like to answer, or if all the 3.
I just very quickly, I think that it's very important to define clearly the areas, because defining the areas will be essential in terms of which areas are more let's say, can be tackled better, and the resources can be approached. I will concentrate only on this question of the incubators. I think that my experience has been in the last 10 or 15 years or so, is that we don't really have a space for incubating companies, and it's not the right environment, the research institutes for incubating the companies. Companies have to be incubated in a place where you have a completely different ecosystem. It has to do with other companies being there, with the mindset of the people that are there, with the type of support that these companies needs. I mean, I was imagining an incubator where somebody with a great idea, with a patent that already exists, willing to move into one of these places, and essentially the incubator provides everything else. They don't have to worry about setting up a completely new space, a new lab, and then they have access to equipment and to facilities to promote their work and to develop their work. So incubators are really a place like we saw, but I mean, we saw that funnel in the Basel launch. And I think that funnel is really an essential part of the creation of value, because that's where you will identify the best companies, identify the best places. And for that, you need you don't need hundreds of incubators. You need one incubator for, let's say, the whole of the University of Porto, where you have, let's say, you might have 20 or 30 startups every year that have ideas and they want to promote their ideas. So you need to have one for a large academic environment, a large ecosystem, where then they can be identified, they can be, and then once they are identified, they can be incubated. That's the whole point. They can be guided through the process of getting to beyond the proof of concept into the clinical trials. And for that, I think that it is an essential component, and we don't really have many. We have very few.
Well,
Okay.
Sim, diga, Luís.
I think the biggest benefit of these incubators is in the composition of the selection panel of the incubator. So you do have input. It's a fantastic opportunity for startup companies to get access not only to industry but also to venture funds. So it focuses their attention and their efforts into something that is commercially viable, that is really, you're going to generate a business, and that business is based on a medicine that will have an impact on patients. So it is going to satisfy an unmet medical need. If you're going to focus your company on a disease that is very well treated if patients go on a certain diet, or if patients can get adequately treated with steroids, which are generic, then you are left, with not a lot. But if you are focusing on diseases which are still the life expectancy is very low because there is no treatment, or this type of considerations is extremely helpful for researchers in academia to get a feel for. So what is the unmet medical need that they are trying to address, and what are the critical questions that the pharma industry will ask you? So Claudio, when you were saying earlier that this industry not coming to academia to show its problems, here you have exactly a good forum to do this. You have industry sitting around the table, and it's a little bit, you feel like this program where, what's it called? The Shark Tank, where companies, Shark Tank, people go and pitch and this is more or less what is happening here. People the entrepreneurs have an opportunity to present, and they by getting these questions from venture funds and from big pharma, that's the way that they will health focus. And if they don't succeed the first time they go to present, they try again, and they try again, second time and third time, and go back and maybe have another idea in the lab, some other postdoc who is doing something that is actually of more interest to the industry. That's how you're going to help. My final comment is on Health Cluster Portugal. I really think that this institution of Health Cluster Portugal can play an important role for establishing the mindsets of all the players. So let's think about the biotech, not in the classical industry and academia, but also involve, for instance, hospitals. I hope I illustrated with my example of the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, how hospitals can also play a very important role and make a lot of money by investing in biotech. And I think, I mean, we have done, Paula talked about IBET. IBET is a very, very good example of an institute that has been able to generate business as a CRO, if I may say so, and the CMO, and has had his own attempt at the startup. But we have private healthcare groups in Portugal, Group Melo, then we have Group Luz Saúde, and we have Champalimau. All of those, they have really world-class doctors who could practice medicine anywhere in the world, and they can be encouraged to participate in the biotech scene as well. I think, and I know from some people I know in these groups that they are making an effort, but there is a lot more that can be done, and I hope that with future sessions of Health Cluster Portugal, we can also continue the dialogue with these hospitals to play a role which can be much, much bigger than they play today in stimulating the creation of biotechs.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Luis Correia. Thank you all the three. Will really have to move to the next panel, but I would like to thank you for this insightful and interesting discussion. Now moving to the next panel of this afternoon, which is focused on digital medicine. We have Dr. Claudio Portaleone, whose presentation will be followed by the commentary of Professor Fernando Araújo, President of University Hospital Center of São João, and Dr. Filipa Fisch, Executive Board Member of Glint. So thank you all for accepting our invitation. Dr. Claudio Portaleone is Sales and Solutions Manager at Siemens Healthineers in Germany. He has a background in business administration, and today he will present some examples of successful telehealth projects in Germany. So Dr. Claudio, be very welcome. The screen is yours.
Thank you very much, Patricia. I hope you can hear me, and I'm going to share the presentation. And so I hope you can see.
Yeah, it's perfect, your presentation.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for having me in today's event. It's a very honor for me and a pleasure, and particularly an honor because I can talk about one of my personal passions, but more importantly, one of the elements which I believe are the main key for digitalization in the healthcare markets, which is telehealth. And I'm talking about some success factors for telehealth on basis of our experience of our HerzConnect project with our clinic partner in Germany. So what does it make, or what do we need to be successful in telehealth? Now, the project has its roots many years ago, and we thought about how or where do we start with really digitalization in terms of telehealth. So we looked into the statistics, and chronic heart failure is by far one of the main challenges of our times. And I think that's a universal matter we find in Western countries. Why? In Germany, we do have more than 2 million people suffering from chronic heart failure. And that has an effect because more than 400,000 hospitalizations are statistically covered because of chronic heart failure. So you have many people who go to hospital because of that one disease. And not only that, you see also a growing number of people suffering from chronic heart failure. So it was quite easy, we didn't take a long time looking at the statistic, thinking about where do we want to start with a digital solution that has really a great impact for the start. Now, this matter of hospitalization has also a socioeconomic impact, of course, for the single patient, but for the whole healthcare sector, because half of the costs are associated with the hospitalization, causing more than 2 billion euro a year for the German healthcare market. So it's a huge, huge amount that we are paying for this disease. So the really roots was very clear. So we really looked at the statistics and came to this conclusion. Now, before I move on to the story of HerzConnect, I would like to highlight something very important. Telehealth is nothing you have to define beforehand the disease. It's a platform to expand your medical care to the people, to the patients at home. And why do I say this? I think in pandemic times, we have seen the strength of telemedicine. And just one statistics which really came to us just a few weeks ago is that video conferencing as one means of telemonitoring has increased by over 1,000% in Germany, which shows that how strong telehealth has impacted Germany in only 1 year. I mean, the pandemic times are very special, but it shows that this telehealth platform is really a strong one, which can be expanded to many other diseases. Now, coming back to the roots of HerzConnect. We, after identifying chronic heart failure as the first point to target telehealth, we were quite surprised that we have a significant structural problem in Germany by caring for chronic heart failure patient. Because there is a misconception that every patient is also treated by a cardiologist. This is not the case. More than half of the patients are only treated by their physician, which is not bad. But what we also learned is that many of these patients, usually older than 60 years, live in rural areas. So our thought was, okay, we know that chronic heart failure is one of the key issues of our time. And we know that those patients suffering from chronic heart failure live usually not in a metropolitan area. So how can we really make a change? And that was really the storyline for telehealth, and we succeeded on that matter. Now, before I talk more about the development of a project, I would like to share some secrets with you. Not secrets, but more secret ingredients for being successful for telehealth. But because as I'm working many years already in the telehealth sector, I saw many projects which were started just for the sake of digitalization. And we are more really hand-picking those projects because we know exactly how success would be for a telehealth project. And these three success factors are as follows. The first is science. So before we start with a telehealth project, we thoroughly understand science, meaning scientific publications, medical reports, white papers. So we really study beforehand the impact that we want to achieve with telehealth projects on a scientific proven fashion. And only if we really have the data clear, we start with all the innovation and technology. So this is really a gold standard that we apply for any telehealth project. And this is one of the key success factors as to why our projects, we can, after those projects, provide really statistics on how successful we were with that project. For HerzConnect, or let's say for telehealth for heart failure patients, we have studies which go for many decades already, and we know for sure that if you have a gold standard telehealth project, that you can reduce mortality and reduce hospitalization for the patients, leading to a reduction of the total cost for the whole healthcare systems. So this is really what the studies are telling us, what is scientifically proven, and which we are actually replicating with our telehealth projects. Now, one personal experience that I have on basis of the studies is quite interesting. Until 2018, we were discussing with clinics with healthcare insurance companies if telehealth is helpful. So the if question was crucial. Since 2018, 2019, we are discussing under which conditions is telehealth suitable. So we changed the way how we talk about telehealth, and this really gives implication on how mature telehealth is already, and that we are only discussing how we implement it, not if it is helpful, because we already know that if correctly applied, we will find long-term benefits for the patients. Now, what I am following the previous discussion, what is interesting is I would not say today that we are currently really waiting for politics and regulation as usually for medical digital innovations to move forward. I think that the spirit of the time is really proactively seeking telehealth products. So success factor number 2 would be the networking perspective. Siemens Healthineers has a long-term tradition into the B2B market, being clinicians, being hospitals, and so forth. So again, we wanted to get closer to the patients because we had a solution at hand identified with our clinical partners that can really make a change for the patient. So we learned that those patients, elderly than 60 years, usually suffer a lot from fear, being at home. And we took a long time to understand what those patients are actually concerned about. So again, patients over 60 years, they listen very much to their networks, be it family, be it relatives, being physicians. And we talked a lot about with our clinical partners and our networks, because we wanted to see how can we really involve people that telehealth is something which helps them to get better over the long term. We came to the conclusion that we need to really put forward the main ambition for every telehealth project, and this is the achievement of medical economical outcomes. So as that is the only interest that collects all interests, we said, okay, we pinpoint this argument, and now we have to move forward. The implication for Siemens Healthineers and the partners is as follows. We changed the way how we communicate, because in a digital area, we shouldn't accept that every patient is a digital native, knowing exactly how to use digital infrastructure. So we engaged in a big network with health insurance companies, with clinicians to publish and inform patients and their relatives and their friends and their physicians on the benefit of telehealth, be it in social media, be it in search engine marketing, and informing the benefits of telehealth. So this was something new for Siemens Healthineers and also for our partners, but we knew exactly that if we believe in digitalization, we need also to change the way we communicate and inform people of these benefits. Now, the third secret ingredient is connected with innovation and technology. And before I go to the point, I would like to go more to the real practice on the solution of Siemens Healthineers. Now, our telehealth solution consists of a modular solution which applies to individually for every patient with their respective disease. So we have a range of different devices we provide to the patient, and those devices collect the vital parameters, the vital signs. Those will be sent to a smartphone with an app, and this app is a means by which the communication between the patient and the doctor is being enabled in a really clever fashion, being with questionnaires, being with medication and entering medication. And the app there sends the data then to the telemedical center in the clinic, where a smart and clever software is collecting the vital parameters, and one heart failure nurse can overview many hundreds of patients at once in a really clever fashion. So this is the solution of Siemens Healthineers, and there's one particular point which is absolutely elemental for the success, which is the software, the artificial intelligence. Why? I would say that telehealth projects would not make a difference if you just look to the equipment. Nowadays, the equipment you find to measure vital parameters are usually all of good quality. They are medical products, and you wouldn't differentiate one of the other very much because we have really good products already on the market. The differentiating role, the really key element, is the software behind. So what are you doing with the vital parameters? Now, you collect usually a large data set, and with this software, you are able to detect early warning signals or critical events, enabling the patient to advise, okay, listen, we see that something is going wrong, and intervene to the patient before something happens in a really bad fashion. And more concretely, you could intervene many days before the hospitalization is needed, so-called decompensation, intervene and call the patient. And usually those heart failure nurses, so really trained people, would look after the patient, be it coaching, being nourishing, being sportive activities, or even medication. And the key is to really accompany the patient to live with the disease in a long-term fashion. And this is also all happening with the help of artificial intelligence, because one nurse has to look after many hundreds of patients. Now, what are the implications for Siemens Healthineers? So we invest heavily in R&D and machine learning to make our artificial intelligence even better and more productive, so that we can identify even in any combination the critical events in a scientific proven way, so that the physician can trust that our results will be the best recommendation for intervention. What is also important, and it's also one of the key elements for Siemens Healthineers, is that the physician will always be the last decision makers. So we give only the recommendation of saying, okay, the software, according to a large data set, implies there can be a problem. Please look after that. And the physician will then make the last decision, which is the best case to move forward. Now, the story looks now quite fancy and really in a very good fashion. So one would assume that reimbursement is flushing into the doors. Unfortunately, it is not. We are currently in a situation where reimbursement in Germany is still not, I don't know, would say growing on the streets. It is still a challenge to attract reimbursement. So on the left-hand side, you see the funding bodies usually for telehealth projects, and you would find usually in any project a combination of those sources for telehealth projects. Now, I personally believe that we are currently in a transition phase where more and more reimbursement codes are being released by the German government. So more and more telehealth opportunities are being funded. But why am I speaking of a transition phase? The reason is that we have currently so many telehealth opportunities and providers of telehealth products that funding bodies cannot differentiate the one of the other. So I believe there are two specific groups. There are those who provide a really, let's say, a good answer to achieve sufficient supervision. And there are those programs which have an extensive clinical supervision where artificial intelligence and also highly trained heart failure nurses look after the patient. So these are the two groups you would usually find in telehealth on the market, so to speak. And I believe that over the next few years, in a really quick fashion, I believe that those two markets will sharpen even more. And by sharpening the differentiation, why there is some golden standard in quality programs versus others, that would release more reimbursement codes. And we are currently really in a situation in Germany where any program that can provide gold standards and reimbursement codes, such as HerzConnect, reimbursement codes will be released. Now, on what basis do I derive my implications and my arguments? we created HerzConnect, our value partnership with the Heart and Diabetes Center in Bad Oeynhausen in Germany, on the basis of telehealth. So this value partnership goes already some years ago, and it was really a co-creation initiative. So before this initiative, we didn't have any telemedical specific application. We co-created with the value partner of saying, we as Siemens, we bring in digitalization, data privacy expertise, and we are actually the digitalization partner. And the Heart and Diabetes Center had 15 years of experience with telemedicine. So we really said, okay, let's combine forces to create something really new, applying the gold standard of telemedicine and create something which we call HerzConnect. So this is something we would say a new innovative idea, bringing telehealth on the street. And one really nice view on telehealth is that we see nowadays telehealth as a platform, because as we have already this platform with the partners, we create new and new ideas, even scientific studies and tests we can create on basis of this platform, and covering even more patients with their specific diseases. And this is a success of our value partnership with the help of telemedicine. Now, I hope I could inspire most of you with telemedicine, sharing some thoughts on what is success for telehealth. And I'm extremely happy to the panel, to the dialogue, and to the questions of the audience.
So thank you very much, Dr. Claudio, for sharing your experience and on this very interesting project. So now, using the same format as before, I would ask the two panelists, Dr. Filipa Fisch and Professor Fernando Araújo, for their commentaries on this matter. So given their privileged position to understand the trends and the national dynamics of this segment of the health sector, I would invite first Dr. Filipa Fisch for her commentary.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. Thank you again for the invitation. It's my pleasure to be here. And thank you so much, Dr. Claudio, because the presentation was fantastic, because it led to the fantastic world that you can have with technology, but also thinking about everything that we need to do in order to make this a success. So today we live in a world that is led by digital, mobile, and virtual. Everything is done by technology, and our life was transformed by technology. And in the last year, we have accelerated more than, I guess, 10 years. And I think the question still remains is how we can fully realize the potential of all this technology that we have on a smartphone, for instance. How can we fully realize the power of technology in the healthcare sector? And telecare, I think, and I believe that is one of the main vectors to achieve this goal, how we can make more use of technology in the healthcare sector. A study from the World Economic Forum shows that more than 90% of the persons that have used telecare, meaning telemedicine and telemonitoring, during the pandemic crisis, want to use this telecare after. So it's quite important that we have this equilibrium after the pandemic crisis between in-person visit and in the telecare world. Of course, I guess, and we are seeing now that along with the vaccination, we are decreasing the amount of telecare that we have, because we had a peak during the pandemic, but we need to continue pursuing this, the telemonitoring, I guess, with the telemedicine, in order to, for instance, have a full control of the chronic diseases of a country. If you look to the roads in Portugal, for instance, we can have in a room, we can have a clear view of the roads that we have and the things that are happening in the different roads of the country. For chronic patient diseases, I think we could also manage to have technology to empower and to give more proper care to these chronic patients if they have the right tools to be monitored at a distance. So, but I guess, and as you said in your presentation, it's not just about putting technology and giving the patient and the physicians the technology and leave it there. Of course, experience and evidence matters. The virtual care, it will remain if the physicians and the patient get the right experience, because afterwards they will continue to look to improve and to use more and more the virtual care. Also, from the providers, they have to understand that they have to enhance the capabilities that they have in terms of technology. Of course, if we rely on virtual consultations or virtual monitoring, of course, technology has to be improved, and how we can keep the data, analyze the data, and give access to the patient at home or at a distance has to be improved by technology. So I think the healthcare providers also need to think and need to merge their capabilities along with tech companies and new companies in the world of digital health and biotech, as we were discussing on the previous slides. So if payers, providers, and the patients can achieve the right mix between in-person visits and virtual care, I think the overall experience for patients, for citizens, even before they get sick, it will be improved. And of course, this will reduce the costs that we have with managing the disease. And I think we'll go more to managing the health. And if we decrease the costs on the part of the disease, we of course can use that money to improve the outcomes in health and invest in other technology, medicines, or even to upgrade the process that we have in the institutions. So I think all settled, it can be improved. Of course, it has to be a combination between all the players, and as we are looking now during this pandemic crisis, the citizen has to be in the center. And this, of course, is not just with the healthcare providers. We need to mix technology, we need to mix other disciplines in order to get the right experience for physicians, for health professionals, and for the patients, to make sure that we are getting better outcomes. And to finish, I think we need to also consider and to discuss the implications of having more virtual care. So we need to protect against care inequities, because we know that we have a lot of persons in the world that don't have or are offline, either because they are not connected or because they do not have literacy in the digital world. So we cannot forget about those people. Also, we need to manage for the change. It's not all about technology, it's much more about changing the process and giving the right feeling and the purpose to use and to use all the telecare that we have available right now. Also, the third point, and I think it's a huge discussion, is about the health data. Of course, we need to respect the privacy to make sure the privacy and the security, to make sure that everyone is using it in a very open but secure way, as we use for financial issues. Right now, we can do everything by a distance of a click. And also, as you said in your presentation, how you use this data to make sure that we are transforming this into information, and again, into knowledge, and that we can have the right decisions with information in real time. So I think these three factors have to be also discussed. We put it in place so to make sure that we have the right projects in the right way. But at the end, I think that the technology is here. The pandemic crisis has pushed much more to use and to take out the barriers that we had before. So we need to make sure that we have the right purpose and that we are just considering and taking into account that health data is going with the patient, and that is getting the right treatment and the right engagement to make sure that everyone is aware that without technology, we cannot talk about the future of health. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Filipa Fisch, for your commentary. I would now invite Professor Fernando Araújo.
Good afternoon. First of all, I would like to congratulate Dr. Claudio Portaleoni for this very interesting presentation. I will make some brief commentary, as Filipa Fisch already pointed out the main questions that you came. In Portugal, we have some programs regarding telehealth that are reimbursed by our national health system, as heart failure, as you mentioned, as myocardial infarction, and obstructive chronic lung diseases. They are relatively new programs, but with high success between doctors and patients. However, these kind of programs are very limited. They include a residual number of patients. And as you mentioned, these kind of programs could reduce costs and could promote the gain in quality of the patients. So we are trying in our hospital and other hospitals in the country to include other kind of patients, or for instance, day surgery patients, in order to perform more complex surgeries and to withdraw the patients very precocely from the hospital. But the devices that are in the market are expensive, and most of these areas are not reimbursed by our national health system. So we are trying to pressure the national health system not to be a silent spectator, but to be in command of this change, to build programs that pressure change, to build programs that financial this evolution and could bring space in order to create a smart health projects that could help us change the health management and build a new NHS, a strong one and a smart one, as we can say that. Regarding all these aspects, I have one question to Dr. Claudio Portaleoni. Do you think actually nowadays the main factors to the success of this kind of project that you present are the correct selection of the patients and the strength of the clinical team more than the technology itself? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Please, Dr. Claudio Portaleoni, if you can jump into the discussion.
Thank you very much. That's an extremely important question, because the answer would be it is only successful if they are three together working at the same high quality. It is the technology, it is highly qualified personnel, certified, so really experienced with telemedicine. And as we know from the studies, it's the right patient selection. So, and this is something, of course, because telehealth is not only a means for medical, it is also an economy you have. And you need to really, that's why it was success factor number one, to really make sure that what you do with telehealth is the right thing for the cause, for the medical point. Because otherwise you would maybe include patients who would not benefit that much from telehealth. And this patient selection, as we learned from the studies, is so crucial. And this is something that, for example, trained, highly qualified heart failure nurses can do, or we can derive from the science. So I would answer all the three equally.
Okay, so thank you very much. I think we have shared important ideas on how we can sustain the progresses that have been achieved during the last months, but also on how to create the conditions to improve. We have talked about patient-related outcomes, cost reduction, digital health and literacy, health data, and also reimbursement. So I think we have tackled a lot of these points. So I don't know if any of the panelists has any additional comments to close this panel. If not, I would thank all of you for sharing with us their thoughts and move to the final panel of this afternoon. Thank you. So the last session of the meetings is dedicated to the topic of clinical trials. And to address this topic, we have invited Dr. Marianne Pilgaard from Trial Nation in Denmark. And to comment, we have two prominent players of the Portuguese clinical trials ecosystem, Professor Luís Costa, the director of the oncology department at the University Hospital Center Lisboa Norte, and Dr. Paulo Martins de Jesus, medical director at Merck Sharp and Dohme in Portugal. So thank you very much for accepting this invitation. It's a pleasure to have you sharing your expertise and perspectives on such significant subject. So about Dr. Marianne, she's the CEO of Trial Nation in Denmark. She has more than 25 years of experience in clinical trial development, business, and private-public partnerships. And today she will present Trial Nation, a single national entry point for those who want to conduct clinical trials in Denmark. And also she will explore some parallels between the Danish and the Portuguese realities. So thank you very much, Dr. Marianne.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to this exciting meeting today. I will share my screen. There we go. Now you can see Trial Nation. That is our logo, Clinical Trials Denmark. And let's see, just see here. Yes, I would like to take you through, just to get you a bit of background on Denmark as a country and Trial Nation. Then, as you alluded to, I will make a brief comparison on Denmark and Portugal, where we are with regards to clinical trials. And then I will give just a few selected examples on how we work with the digitalization of clinical trials in Denmark. So first, Denmark and Trial Nation. Some of you may have visited Denmark. You see a beautiful picture of what it looks like at this time of year and a bit later on. Small country, 5.8 million people. We have outstanding clinical competencies. I say that with pride, but it's not an exaggeration. It's internationally recognized. Some of our hospitals typically rank very high in the rankings of hospitals in Europe, for instance. We also have extensive saturated longitudinal health data, and that is something which is also helped by the fact that we have a central person register, which is a unique 10-digit identifier linked to each individual, which we have had in place since 1968. And this central person register is used in a lot of systems, including the electronic medical record system. So from cradle to grave, you're identified with the same number, regardless of where you are treated. In addition, we have about 160 additional CPR-linked health registries. And we also have a national biobank with over 22 million CPR registered linked samples. So we have quite a lot of data. We have a stable population where it's easy to follow patients over time. Now, Trial Nation, we are a Danish publicly funded non-profit political initiative, and we pursue the benefits of clinical trials. And in essence, you could say that we relay stakeholder perspectives and we connect business with clinics. We have very strong political backing. TrialNation was born out of a specific political initiative, which is part of a larger life science plan. And actually, Denmark is about to review the life science strategy, and we expect it to be released any day now. So we are very excited about that. Looking at TrialNation, we have a smaller secretariat with 5 employees and plus myself. Then we also have 5 pharma advisors which are employed in each of the 5 Danish regions. We also have 5 medtech advisors. Again, they are all employed by the regions. And we have 5 legal advisors who specifically address legal topics and contracts related to clinical trials. We also have 2 student associates who work with us part-time. And as a side note, almost exclusively, healthcare is universal and it's public in Denmark. So everybody is covered by healthcare, and we have a handful of private entities, but you could say that it's almost exclusively publicly run. Looking at TrialNation, some of the things in the construct of TrialNation was looking at how do we make sure that we cover the ecosystem around clinical trials. Our purpose is to increase the number of clinical trials in Denmark per capita in Europe and stay in the top 3 tier. In this, we have all the 5 Danish hospital owners, which are the regions. We have a board composite also of equal representatives from the industry. We have the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Industry, Business and Financial Affairs, which is our main backer, you could say. Then in addition, we also have pro bono memberships with Danish patients who have an observatory role on the board. Danish Patients is an umbrella organization for patient organizations in Denmark. And we also have the Danish medical societies on our board, also in an observatory capacity. So what is it that we do? Well, we maintain and develop disease-specific network with excellent track records of industry collaboration on a national level, which is a strength, especially when you're a country with a smaller population. We also address barriers, be that legal barriers, administrative barriers, perceptual barriers, etc., etc. We also work on promoting what we can do. Being a small country, it's important to show what your capabilities are. And we inform about the synergies of clinical trials. We know that clinical trials is a benefit of the individual patient participating in a clinical trial, but it's also a benefit to the society as a whole, since it provides both direct impact in terms of jobs and employment, but it also increases health in the population long term. When it comes to the network and the contact with the clinical communities, we actually relay feasibilities within all disease areas to all the Danish clinical trial units. And in this, we do that in close collaboration with the regions, and our regional colleagues who are, again, employed by the regions play a crucial role in this. In addition, we have specific disease areas where we have a specific clinical trial infrastructure, which we support a bit extra. And this encompasses about 40 clinical trial units across Denmark. Now, when we work in TrialNation, we actually have quite a lot of interfaces. You saw from what I described earlier, what our scope is and what our purpose is. This means that we have a lot of contact around the ecosystem around clinical trials in Denmark, but also abroad. I mentioned earlier that we have both the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Business on our board. We also have a very close collaboration with our Foreign Ministry and looking at the investment and attraction side. We have close contact with our member companies, both locally, but also their head offices to see what we can do in order to support each individual company's pipeline in the best way. We have contacts to the interest organizations within the life science spheres, both within medtech and pharma. CRO networks are extremely important since many of the pharma companies today rely on CROs to perform their clinical trials operations and sometimes also other parts of their process. We work with the investment promotion organizations, again, in showcasing our abilities. We work with individual clinical researchers and clinical trial units, with patient associations. We all know that without patients, there are no clinical trials, and other interest organizations. Our vision is that we pave the way to a future where patients enjoy stronger, sustainable health driven by fast access to cutting-edge medicine and medical technology, where healthcare professionals save more lives and promote stronger health by always having state-of-the-art medical research and the latest discoveries right at their hand. And through clinical research, we create a better health and wealth for Denmark. Now, moving into just a brief comparison of Denmark and Portugal, we have looked at the clinical trials data in 2020. But first, I would like to tell you a bit about how we work with this data. We work with competitive intelligence, meaning following what are the trends within clinical trials. Are there new technologies coming in? Looking at convergence of different fields. For instance, one of the strong trends, as you all know, are how do you use big data? The use of big data in artificial intelligence, the convergence between medical technology and pharmaceutical interventions. Those are some examples of competitive intelligence that we have identified recently. Decentralization of clinical trials, which is also a very strong trend. Then we also follow up on interventions. And by that, I mean, for instance, if we have a legislation, a local legislation, which is changed in order to, for instance, improve framework conditions, which is one of the areas which we work with, what does it then mean for the individual researchers? What does it mean in terms of competitiveness in running clinical trials? Then, of course, we keep track of companies' pipelines to identify where is the vast volume of trials moving, which areas, which technologies are used, what does that mean in terms of the requirements of clinical trial units, and how do you make sure that you're on top of what's going to be needed for the trials in the future? And in essence, we use this to uncover opportunities. Now, we have one tool that we use, and there are many different tools, but in this particular case, we've used a tool called Global Data, and to look at what does it look like for clinical trials during 2020. And again, this is of course based on the data that we have available in this particular tool. And one of the first aspects I would like to draw your attention to is the trial distribution between commercial and academic trials, where the blue shows the commercial trials and the orange shows academic trials, where you can see that on an EU level, and again, this was in 2020, so this includes UK in 2020, about more than half is actually academic trials, looking at an EU level. And in Denmark, it's fairly the same, but a slightly less number of academic trials than commercial trials. One important aspect in this is that we have a very vibrant academic community with comparatively good opportunities for applying for funding for academic trials. Looking at what it looks like in Portugal, you can see that your aspect, your ratio is far more commercial trials than in comparison to the registered academic trials based on the data that we had available in this tool. On the right-hand side on the slide, you can see the number of trials per 10,000 inhabitants. And there you can see that in Denmark, we have quite a high number of clinical trials per inhabitant. And you have a great opportunity in Portugal to build on your current status. Now, I said that decentralized clinical trials or digitalization of clinical trials is a very hot area. And that is something which we work on in Denmark. The first example, I'm going to give you two specific examples. The first example is that we are working on a way for patients and the public to easier find a clinical trial which may be relevant for them, or for the general practitioner who want to refer a patient to a treatment within the umbrella of a clinical trial. And that is a public overview of clinical trials using the information from the submission process and enrich that with complementary data. And by that, what I mean in practice is that it's quite, if you're a very tech-savvy patient and if you know your way around, you can find out, for instance, by going on the EU website or going to clinicaltrials.gov that there is a trial for my condition in my country. But very often it's very difficult to know, okay, so to which institution do I go? And more specifically, which person do I contact? And is this particular trial open for recruitment, meaning that could I actually participate in this trial? And that is something which we are working on in Denmark, so that you can find out, okay, I live in, let's say I live in the outskirts of a city in southern Denmark. Where is my closest possible contact in participating in this trial? So by that, the availability to participate in a clinical trial is much easier for the individual patient. Another example is a project where we participate as project partner on decentralized clinical trials. We have a research fund, a public research fund called Innovation Fund Denmark. It has the scope of building research collaborations with good possibilities for commercialization. They support a collaboration between researchers, companies, and Trial Nation on the development of a digital platform for clinical trials. And in this particular project, it runs over 2 years, and it runs with 3 studies within the chronic disease space. And our role in this particular project is to collaborate with stakeholders on framework conditions for decentralized clinical trials in Denmark. And that means, for instance, working together with the patients and patient organization on how do you make decentralized clinical trials work from a patient perspective. And on the right-hand side, you can see in Danish an article from an event together with patient organizations in getting the extremely important input from the patient perspective on certain aspects of decentralized clinical trials. We also work with the life science companies in identifying, okay, which particular elements is it that from a life science company perspective is important to look at. From the researcher's perspective, what does it mean running a clinical trial as a researcher in a decentralized setting? What are the good things? Which are the things that we need to have specific focus on? And we also have a fantastically fruitful collaboration with our authorities. So the Danish Medicines Agency has established a dialogue forum taking different life science companies and patients and researchers on board in together identifying are there certain aspects which needs to be clarified in the legislation. How do you work with implementing decentralized elements in clinical trials? So our authorities are very, very positive towards a digitalization of clinical trials. And with that, I close my talk and I look forward to hearing the reflections and looking forward to discussing with you should there be questions to my presentation. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Marianne. Very interesting perspective on the Danish reality that I'm sure has raised some points that need to be addressed also to foster this segment of the Portuguese ecosystem. We will now hear the commentary from Professor Luís Costa and Dr. Paulo Martins Jesus. So I would ask Professor Luís Costa to start and then Dr. Paulo Martins Jesus would follow, please.
Hello, good afternoon. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Okay, good. So first of all, thanks for the invitation. It was fantastic to listen to this talk. Professor Marianne, thanks so much for sharing us not what is happening in Denmark, but also the comparison with the picture, or at least the global data picture for Portugal. And I took here some notes that I believe are in some way toward a more deep comparison between what is our reality in Portugal and what we can do better. First of all, I think you have to stress three major things that we have in common. Our health system is mostly public here in Portugal, mostly, as it is in Denmark. We have also national registration for some kinds of disease, at least for cancer, is obligatory. We have also a national network for biobanking, but unfortunately, we do not have a good link between any of these two structures, which means it will be crucial, at least for academic trials. I think this will be very important to reinforce the connectivity between national registration for some diseases and the biobanks. And I may give an explanation for that, but I would also like to listen from you how you can also assure this capacity of connectivity between different structures. My guess is that because in your country, things came top down. Most of times here in Portugal, it happens bottom top. Means they have to happen first and then they will be recognized. I mean, I see some smiles in Paulo Martins Jesus. I think he understands me quite well, okay? The second comparison, and this will be, I wish I could like to have a comparison for that, is that you mentioned that clinical trials in your country is under the authority of the Minister of Health, as it should be, but also the Minister of Industry, Business and Financial. Well, I'm glad that here we had the Minister of Economy here today with us. There was never a good understanding, this is not a personal critics, but there's never a good understanding between the Minister of Science, who is somehow leading the clinical trials here, and the Minister of Health. I mean, somehow, if you ask something to build up on clinical trials, there was some doubts about who should be authorizing that. It was the Minister of Science or Minister of Health. This has to be finished. So things have to take definitely a political decision about top-down what the country needs on this field. And I hope health clusters Portugal can help us on that. It's very definitely important that the economy stays as an important perspective for here. We're talking about business, not talking about trading patients, talking about understanding this is a value. And the value here is knowledge and how to treat better our patients. I mean, it was clear from your presentation that the clinical trials are perceived as a clinical benefit, first of all, for the patients. Second, for the hospitals or societies who have to take care of these patients. And finally, for the citizens overall. I mean, they have to understand that. And it's very important to explore it, the idea that it's very important, the connection, not only with the companies, but also the CROs. Well, CROs will become more and more important in the future, particularly if you want to have access to good pipelines. I believe that if you create a very good professional structure, as you are doing in Denmark, and if you create that in Portugal, we'll be capable to negotiate also with the drug companies and with the CROs, the trials that serve best our patients. Because you can offer a good service, then you can also negotiate saying, well, we will need this trial because we have a lot of patients with this condition, and we should serve them also with this kind of science. And I think it's very important. Now, to finalize, not take much more time, for me was really astonishing when you told about decentralization of clinical trials, which I totally agree, but I think we have to think about that in Portugal right away. I mean, many people can criticize saying, okay, you are going to fragment the professionals that we don't have yet, the knowledge that we don't have yet, and then we'll lose quality. I don't think so. Things have to be performed in parallel, and my opinion is that it will be critical for Europe that if you don't make the science more proximate to the citizens, we will have changes in the choices of the patients or the citizens according to politics options, and that will be really a nightmare for the future. So we need to provide differentiation together with proximity to all citizens. And think this idea of decentralization is key, is fantastic. Now I would like to learn, if you could explain me better, how can you do it? For instance, you have regions where probably you have more scarce number of patients and citizens. Maybe you don't have huge or big hospitals or structures over there. How can you, if you can explain me better, how you can make the right connections between let's gonna say the leading hospital is taking care of a clinical trial and other hospitals or other centers that also can participate on that. That will be one major question that I have for you. Thank you.
So I would ask Dr. Paula Martins to make her commentary before Dr. Marianne could reply to the questions of Professor Luís Costa. So then in the end, we have a broader discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much. First, allow me to thank Health Cluster Portugal for this kind invitation and to congratulate for this exceptional initiative. Compliment Professor Luís Costa and for sure Dr. Marianne Pilgaard. Dr. Pilgaard, many, many thanks for your excellent and insightful presentation. In fact, and I took some notes here, but in fact, clinical research is undeniably an essential activity for bringing benefits to health professionals, institutions, and the scientific community, and for sure patients. As the pace of science continues to evolve, I would say the drug development process still remains long and costly. So improving clinical trial designs and efficiency presents an important challenge that deserves attention from all the stakeholders. I believe today, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe today Denmark conducts the second most clinical trials per capita in Europe. And this is really an impressive growth over the time. I would say that reading and after your excellent presentation, I would say the keystone, and agreeing with Professor Luís Costa, 100% in agreement, I would say that the keystone for this achievement was the political willingness of the Danish government that have taken active steps to boost the life science industry. And for me, this includes, of course, a keen political focus on improvement, the framework conditions for conducting clinical trials, a clear organizational focus, and you mentioned, foresee the creation of the trial nation, the continuous optimization of clinical trial processes and procedures, and of course, as you mentioned, barrier removals and support services for patient recruitment, which I think it is really critical. I believe also Denmark has a long tradition for collaboration between the public sector, the academia and industry, which I think it is a milestone, a keystone in the whole thing. Lastly, the high level of the education in Denmark, I believe, contributes to the population generally very positive attitude towards participating in clinical trials, and you boost these supporting patients. Sadly, I must say, Portugal seems a bit behind. The attractiveness and competitiveness of Portugal for carrying out clinical trials has been and still is a central topic of discussion among the different stakeholders. Recognizing, although, that some steps have been done, in contrast to Denmark, Portugal still have a long way to go. In fact, we face a sharp loss of competitiveness in the first decade of the early 20s, with a positive trend in the recent years. Yet, I believe this positive trend did not allow for consistent recovery. The number of trials submitted per million of inhabitants is one of the lowest in Europe, as you show also in your presentation, and it is amazing the distance between Portugal and Denmark. And several hurdles have been identified in Portugal for having this small contribution to clinical trials. And I think there are 4 different areas that in Denmark were addressed. And for us, and for me in particular, these 4 areas are related to policy and strategy. I mean, the recognition of the strategical importance of clinical research in Portugal. Then the organization and infrastructure, the evaluation of clinical research by hospital administrations with the creation of support structures really organized with autonomy for research. Then the third level, I would say, incentives and career path for researcher and professionalized research teams. And lastly, but absolutely not the least, technology and information enhancement, like Professor Luis Costa started to say. And like we have seen in your presentation, Dr. Pilgaard, the extensive health data that you have in Denmark and the examples of clinical trial digitalization that you show. So I would say it is critical and urgent to pragmatically address these hurdles in order to succeed, and should be top-down, inflicting this spirit in the scientific community, but coming from the political willingness. So, Dr. Malien Pilgaard, your presentation just showed that this is possible, this is feasible, as long as there is a political willingness, and if all the involved stakeholders have the same desire and common goals, success is guaranteed for the benefit, of course, of patients, the scientific committee, and above all, the society. So many thanks and congratulations for the excellent results of Denmark. We wish to be near you somehow in the future for sure. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. answering the first question, how do we work with smaller hospitals, etc., etc. First, I would like to stress, like was mentioned, that we are very strong on public-private partnerships. That's a good Danish discipline, I would say, that we are very good at in working together. When it comes to how do you work together with for instance, larger hospitals and smaller hospitals. I'll give you two different examples just to give you a flavor. The first one is within oncology. Within oncology, we have extremely detailed plans on which hospitals take care of which indications. So that means that you have a built-in referral system within the healthcare system, meaning that patients are identified and then treated based on these plans. And typically it's the larger university hospitals. For some cases it's even further centralized, but depending on the actual indication. Another example I would like to give is, for instance, within respiratory medicine, where we within certain regions have nurses who have contacts to the different hospitals. They work with coaching the patients. For instance, if you have a COPD patient, for instance, they coach them, but that also works as a mechanism of identifying patients who would benefit from participating in a clinical trial. So these are two examples on how you work in a sort of a referral system. So as you can hear, it's not a one size across all therapeutic areas. It's also a bit of a bottom-up initiative, because the last initiative is in a region where you have a low population density, but where you have the need. So I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
I may have another comment.
Yes.
Yeah.
Please.
I think you mentioned also, it's one of the subjects that I did not touch because I was trying to leave time also for listening Paula Martins Jesus and your answer. That can be a little bit astonishing why Portugal has so few academic trials. Well, in my opinion, is that the best academic trials, many times, they are really, well, we can call them academic trials, but they are with grants from private sectors. Okay? But they are promoted by investigators in the public system or in private hospitals, but they may have grants from drug companies, for instance, but really they are academic trials. But for that, it's my perspective is that if you have a good professional team capable to deal with all these commercial trials that are so demanding, because if you don't have on time all the data from the patients, you are put in a blacklist because you didn't work well, then with this kind of competitivity, we can create generations of people to work in academic trials. That's my perspective. But for that, there is one essential decision that was not taken until now by our government. I don't know if any ex-government is listening to us or not. It is, I never saw a call, a really important call from the Minister of Science, so FCT, to academic clinical trials. You see a lot of calls to research, mostly basic research, translational research that is mostly basic research, which are so important, no question about that. They should have calls for academic trials. If you have calls for academic trials, definitely people will understand in Portugal that we will have the financial support to hire the professionals they need to conduct academic trial. And the second most benefit is that to have size and number and accountability for numbers of patients, they have to create connectivity between cities, which is something difficult in our country, although we are larger than Denmark in population, okay? But sometimes it's difficult. And so that will be a major task, is to create a possible call for academic trials in Portugal, which I never saw it before. I don't know if Paul agrees with me.
I completely agree that the two it's a whole ecosystem. You can't separate them from each other, because the skills that you build you can use in both, and the academic recognition that you receive from a well-conducted, published in the right journals, getting good bibliography scores, of course, increases your attractiveness in key positions in commercial clinical trials.
So if Dr. Paula Martins Jesus would like to make a final comment,
and just it is more than a comment. It's really a question. I believe Denmark did a long way, right? You are really improving, and now you are excellent. What was the trigger for you to start? Because I think we need a trigger to start also. What was the main trigger that led the Danish government to say, no, this is the way we want to do this?
I think it's a combination of a very strong life science industry in Denmark. You know that there are big pharma companies which are still Danish. It's part of how they are constructed, so it's not so easy to just buy a Danish, one of the major Danish companies. And I think it was something which was a bit of a wake-up call, looking at the clinical trials, which in the mid-10s were declining in Denmark, and that there was a wake-up call that actually we need to do something if we want to keep and increase the number of clinical trials. So, and that was a push from both life science companies and in dialogue with the different ministries, but there was also the strong public-private collaboration gene, you could say, that from the regional side showed that actually we want to make it easier for life science companies to find the right partners with whom to collaborate with, and those two initiatives then in the growth plan for life science, which was launched, was then part of forming the initiative. So a bit of sense of urgency and a strong economic factor need. Yeah.
So thank you very much. I hate to interrupt this insightful discussion, but we really have to close this session. To finish by thanking all the participants in this panel. And we will now come to the end of this edition of the Meetings with Health Innovation. It's been a pleasure to host you during this afternoon. I think we've had a very exciting discussion and the chance to hear from applied experience from different players, from different countries. Many ideas and many important messages have been conveyed. So I hope you have enjoyed it as much as we did. I'd like to take the chance on behalf of the Health Cluster Portugal also to thank once again all the speakers and also all the participants in this session. And to finish, just to leave you with a couple of brief messages. First, to let you know that we will have the replay of the meetings available online in the Health Cluster Portugal's YouTube channel. And second, that the presentation slides will be sent by email to those who requested by completing the survey that will be sent shortly. And now just a very quick note for the Health Cluster Portugal members and changing to Portuguese. Para relembrar os associados que a Assembleia Geral do HCP terá início dentro de breves momentos e que para aceder à mesma pedimos que utilizem o link que terão recebido por e-mail. Caso experienciem alguma dificuldade, por favor, contactem-nos. So enjoy the rest of your week and goodbye.